Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jono White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jono White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to episode 11 of the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm Jono White, your host, founder and principal consultant of Clarity. And I was just saying actually off the mic before we started recording that I've been looking forward to this all day, because today's guest is Paul Fochtman. Paul is the head of school at Frankfurt International School. And since 2010, Dr. Fochtman has served as the head of school, like I said, at Frankfurt International School. It's an IB World School that serves nearly 1,800 students aged 3 to grade 12 across 2 campuses in the heart of Germany. Originally from, and Paul can correct me shortly whether I get this right, Petoskey in Michigan, Dr. Fochtman's career began in the pharmaceutical industry, but shifted to education in the early 90s. Since then, his career has taken him across the globe from a high school chemistry, economics, and physics teacher in Gaum to principalships and a superintendent role at international schools in New Delhi and Mumbai. In 2018, he was named Superintendent of the Year by the Association for the Advancement of International Education, the youngest recipient of the award to date. Dr. Fochtman studied business and economics at Lycoming College, educational administration at the University of Guam, and business administration at Duke University before completing his doctoral study at the University of Minnesota. In 2016, Dr. Fochtman was also awarded a fully funded fellowship to, and I'll once again see if I get this right, the Klingenstein Center for Independent School Leadership's Heads of Schools program at Teachers College, Columbia University. Dr. Fochtman and his family are deeply involved in service, having participated in several Operation Smile missions, the Kalahari Education Experience Project in South Africa, and other educational initiatives throughout Asia. In addition to his role as head of school at FIS, Dr. Fochtman is also an alumni parent. Both of his children graduated from the school. Welcome, Dr. Paul Fochtman. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Jono. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, pleasure.
Well, like I said, I've been looking forward to this all day. I loved reading out your bio, and I have to. Firstly, let me ask, because this links to the next question. Petoskey, Michigan. Petoskey. How do you pronounce it?
Petoskey.
Petoskey. Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to just for our listeners to get to know you a little bit. As I was saying before we started recording, the idea of the podcast is that it's like we're in a cafe chatting about all things leadership, and all of our listeners from everywhere around the world are sitting with us, and we're just talking leadership. So I guess before we jump into that, it'd be great to get to know a little bit about you. You can tell us a little bit more about where you were born, Petoskey, and just tell us a little about your family growing up. How many siblings you had, where you came in the siblings, that sort of stuff.
Sure. So actually, I was born in Rochester, Minnesota for a year. My parents were both in the health field at the Mayo Clinic.
Sure.
And then when I was 2, we moved up to Petoskey, Michigan, where my dad had practiced and my mom was a nurse up there.
Yep.
I'm the oldest of 3. I've got a brother who lives in New York City and is in the financial business. And my sister runs her own marketing company out of Minneapolis and Florida.
Awesome.
So yes, Petoskey is just a small. I grew up most of the time in Petoskey, a small town of 6,000 people.
Wow.
If you look at the MIT, it's very much at the top, right there on Lake Michigan. Not very close to anywhere.
Yeah. How far is it? I'm always intrigued by the difference between and the beauty of childhood stories from the city or from smaller regional towns. So how far is it to your nearest to your larger sort of cities from Petoskey?
So I would say you're probably 5 or 6 hours north of Chicago, or 4 or 5 hours north of Detroit. So the next major city is quite a distance. Or there's different towns throughout Michigan, obviously. But if you're talking about a major metropolitan place,
Yeah.
you're in for a drive or a fly.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. No, that's really helpful for someone like me who has a limited grasp of geography, particularly with the US at the best of times. So thank you. And just once again for our listeners and for me, just so we can get to know you a little better and just understand a bit more about you and the background before I jump in and ask you about your leadership story. But what was a unique or difficult challenge that you had that comes to mind from when you were growing up?
I don't think I'd characterize as a leadership, but growing up, my parents always made me and us have jobs and work no matter what. So paper routes, we had several paper routes, and there was this newspaper, the Petoskey News Review. And I just recall from the time I was about 8 till I was 11, the papers would get dropped off for me to deliver. And the first thing I'd do is I'd open up the pack, go to the backside, and look at the weather. And I was just intrigued at a very young age of it's 96 degrees in Bangkok, Thailand. I don't even know what 96 degrees feels like, and I can't even fathom where Bangkok, Thailand is without going. From my worldview was very much a small town in northern Michigan. And early on, I think just looking at the news of the world and delivering it, and then kind of starting to see the my community as much larger than my small town, started this fire in my belly to go see and immerse myself in the global community. And it started very young, and that's just never forget going, oh, 96, wow, what does that feel like?
I love that because it's just the innocence of looking at that and going, wow. And then it's a great segue into your story because you have traveled so much. I think I see that as really exciting. And so tell us about your leadership story. I guess particularly I'm interested to hear some of the moments along the way that have really shaped Paul Fochtman becoming who you are today as a leader.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I took some education courses in my undergraduate, but never saw myself as a teacher. I really was looking, as you noted, I was in the pharmaceutical industry early on, and I'm glad I came to this view early in my life. And I was selling pharmaceuticals in the Chicago area, and it was a good job. It was a time when it was hard getting jobs, and it just was not fueling my soul. And I just recall actually going for a long weekend, and I was walking back in northern Michigan again. It's just like I got it. I've got to do something that is meaningful.
Yeah.
And I thought about some of the people in my life, different teachers, and even that actually was like a high school principal, an administrator in particular. And I thought, they are making a difference. My parents have made a difference in the health field.
Yeah.
There's more to life than this. And I actually flew to the island of Guam, where my mom and dad had retired. Well, one retired, one hadn't, and they were working over there. So I went over there to visit.
Wow.
And I came, I guess, back up a little bit. So I was in northern Michigan. I walked in thinking about I need something more meaningful. So with that in my head, I went to visit Guam, and I met these teachers, and went biking with them and got to know them pretty well in the short time we were there. And the Department of Defense needed teachers, and I had this science and business background, because at one point I thought about medical school as well, so I had enough science. And they said, we need science teachers, and we will get you certified if you'll come over as an emergency certified teacher. So on the plane ride back to the United States, I thought about it, and I said, I'm going to do it. So I quit my job and packed my bags and moved to Guam and went to work for the Department of Defense on the island of Guam.
Wow.
It's really in their public school system. At that time, the Department of Defense and the island of Guam, their students all went to the same school. And I was certified as a teacher. And while they were constructing a new school, it wasn't quite done. So an interesting story was, as I was waiting to be the high school chemistry teacher, they didn't have a room for me. So for the first semester, they said, well, we're going to send you up to Price Elementary School, and you're going to teach kindergarten. And the class you get is, yeah. So they said the teachers all got to pick 3 students that they wanted out of their class to make my class, which made for an interesting dynamic of the class.
Oh, no.
And the teacher's lounge kind of sat across and watched me make my way through. And so I was able to watch kindergarten cop take classes at the University of Guam and be emergency certified. And that got me my beginning in teaching. Then after that semester, I did go on to be a high school 9th and 10th grade, then AP chemistry and economics teacher. Then there was an earthquake that caused one of our high schools to be could not be used. So we ran. I started a master's degree, and again, that was supported, and I began a degree in administration. And with this earthquake, we ran 2 sessions of schools, And in the morning, I was able to teach. And then at 12:30, a completely other several thousand student high school would come in, and I would be an assistant principal intern.
Wow.
And so, yeah, that was Guam. And then about a year or so after that, I was approached about an assistant principal's position at another major high school, and I accepted that position. And then came back to was coming back to the United States to my wife and I to get married, and had an interview conversation with a superintendent in Michigan who a couple weeks later came back to me and offered me a position as an assistant principal and a physics teacher. And
Wow.
after we thought about it, I moved back to Michigan and was a assistant principal, then principal, and teacher, transportation coordinator, and everything you do at a small school.
Yeah.
Then on to India, where I remember sitting in Michigan and thinking, India, wow, that's quite a change. And next thing you know, we're interviewing for the middle school principalship at the American Embassy School in New Delhi,
Mm.
where I was a middle school principal and high school principal. And we spent 6 years there. And then on to Mumbai, where I was a superintendent in Mumbai for 6 years, in a time of just dramatic growth of the country, of the city and the
Yeah.
school. And
Yeah.
then shortly the year after the terrorist attacks on the 26th of November,
Mm.
the next year, we moved on to Frankfurt International School, where I've been for the last 11 years. So that kind of sequentially is kind of where I've been, kind of around the world, if you will, in public, Department of Defense, and international private schools. So I've really had a broad and deep experience with many different communities. So it's been a fantastic career, and I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's great to get an insight into your story. I want to take you back to that high school principal, or the teacher, or I think you said a high school principal who really impacted you, where you looked at them and thought they're making a difference. What Tell us more about that person, and what was it about them that you think, if you think to back then, as a young Paul, that you looked at them and went, they're really making a difference? What was it and how they led?
There's two people. There's actually a religion teacher, Ray Rao, in ninth grade. He
Yep.
was one, and he would talk about making your dreams visible, and that
Mm.
stuck with me. And then the high school principal, what really struck me and has impacted me, along with and been imprinted by other mentors, was uh, his ability to connect, activate, and bring the best out of everybody around him. So it wasn't the fact that he was some charismatic rah rah leader, but just the way he worked everyone, and it wasn't artificial.
Mm.
It was the students in the hallway. It was the way he talked to teachers. It met, parents, greeting. Everything that person did was about people around him.
Yeah.
And by building up that capacity, that motivation, that inspiration, that potential, all of those things, by building that up in everyone around him in such a, it was like it was just natural the
Yeah.
way that flow went. And I thought, boy, it's not that he's carrying everything on his shoulders. He's he's giving the fuel to others to make this school a great school. And that's what I just remember, how he made me feel and how he
Mm.
made others feel. And it was evident. So that's, I think, what really inspired me to get into um, educational leadership.
Yeah, no, that's really profound with how you unpacked that. If you think back, was there anything in particular that he did, or now as a leader with so much experience yourself, you look back and think, ah, yes, I see how intentional he was about how he did this or that, that you look back on and see that were sort of areas of his leadership where he was very intentional in terms of how he did that, fueling people.
Yeah, I think I recall him visible, all, seem to be everywhere at the right time. Humble, kind. Those are, I think, two things. So you could be, it seemed like it's someone you could talk with either professionally as a teacher or as a student, in taking a risk or something you were challenged with. But I just remember omnipresent,
Yeah.
humbleness, a kindness, an approachability. All of those things are things that I've put in my satchel of leadership. And I don't know if you can learn it or not to be humble, kind. I mean, you can always be visible, but you can be artificially visible.
Yes.
But it's just there's a way about leaders that people will approach, will talk to, and he had that gift.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that. I find it really interesting that you put visibility, um, and that omnipresence always seems to be at the right. He always seems to be at the right important places when you go, oh, he's there again. I love that you put that next to humility because it's come up a lot for me with working with leaders, is as a really necessary thing to invest in for a lot of leaders, which is how can you, if it's, I think it's often when it's not so natural, it's going, how can I intentionally be visible, and authentically, like where are some places it would really matter. I know one of the leaders that I love working with locally where I am here is a great leader. He's a school leader, and when I turn up to do some work with the school, I often see him. I think my guess would be maybe once a week. He's on the, yeah, sort of lollipop, is what we call it over here, with the person who stops the traffic to let the kids and parents cross. And I
Oh
see
yeah.
him there, and I go,
Mhm.
you know what? Obviously, that's a super intentional decision because the way their school is built, every single parent has to cross that crossing. And so he knows that if he just puts himself there once a week, then it's going to be a great way for him to just cross paths with every parent. I know it would be deeper than that too for him because he's a real servant leader. But I um I just noticed that and I thought that's so genius. It's something so simple, and yet it's a way for him to be able to make contact with every student, every parent, in by just being in one place. Um, so yeah, I love that you put that next to humility. That was great, Paul. What about other mentors? Who are some other mentors in your career who have really
Sure.
played a big part in you becoming who you are as a leader today?
Yeah. So another one I would highlight is Dr. Gail Hendricks. She was a principal and then became superintendent, and she's actually the one who encouraged me to pursue leadership at a different level
Mm.
and put some initial leadership characteristics in place. Really uh, tough leader, effective leader, and very caring. And so she was instrumental. But one story about her was interesting. So she hired me as an assistant principal. I'm up at a high school, and we have this earthquake where damage is done to the facility.
Yeah.
36,000 students are in this system, so it's a big network and it's a big system. Um, and I'm getting increasingly frustrated by the lack of response from central office to what I thought saw as a safety concern in our high school, which also meant we couldn't use some classrooms, and teachers are complaining. People are rightfully frustrated,
Mm.
and I was kind of the conduit for that frustration. So in my infinite wisdom, I wrote the quite a sharp memo in the day. We would have sent emails in, but I'm sure it was a paper memo that
Yeah.
went to Dr. Hendricks and CC'd somebody else as she was superintendent now, on my worldview of um, what wasn't getting done, how it should get done, and how they weren't addressing the student safety issues. Well, 2 days later, we get an alert from the security office that Dr. Hendricks is at the front gate up from central office. So she comes into my office. Her face was a little red and she was clearly angry. She stood in my doorway and she said, "Paul, if you ever write a memo like that again, you will be in the classroom the next day." Then she came in further. I'm like, oh my gosh. She came in, she turned the chair around, sat at my desk, and she said, "Now, let's rewrite that memo in a way that is going to get action. And so she sat with me, and we sat for 45 minutes, rewrote the whole memo in a way that was going to invite somebody to help join me in solving a problem. So it's that kind of thing that she could have just been angry. There are a number of ways she could have done, and she was a busy leader. For her to
Yeah.
come up and say, it's important that Paul learns a lesson, and I'm going to go deliver him that lesson, and I'm going to make a teachable moment out of it. That was a real important moment for me. So she was one key member. Where we as leaders make mistakes, are
Yeah.
we as current leaders willing to sit down with those that we're developing and say, okay, made a mistake, let's work together on how we could do it differently. That was a point there. So she's with one, and I can go on with others as well.
Yeah. Oh well. Before you do, I just love the mixture of her response with how direct she was, and sounds like a real fierce leader, but then so caring to actually jump in and and help you get it right. I love that combination. I think there's something really profound about that combination. Who else is there that comes to mind as a mentor for you in your leadership journey, Paul?
Um, so there's a series of um, heads of school from different places that I've worked with, and they've all kind of imprinted me in different ways.
Mm,
There was a Rob Mockrish who had an intensity, uh, an intensity about change, and I learned both, how to harness that intensity and how to channel the intensity. There's a phrase: you get too far ahead of the troops and you start to look like the enemy. There
I
was
love that.
there was a leader, Bob Hetzel, who followed Rob, who had a peaceful, patient, and he really taught me the value of storytelling and caring for people. And of course, as leaders, we always care for people, but
Yeah.
he opened up new dimensions of care. Then there was a course, I didn't know these international schools really existed. I knew Department of Defense, and my Dick Weatherman was a professor at the University of Minnesota, and he and Sue Rosenthal they led a program there, and they offered me an opportunity to take a couple classes with a summer cohort of international people, and there I met. There was a number of heads of schools that ran a course on how to lead a school during a war, and so that group mentored
Wow.
me in crisis management.
Yes.
And there's been, obviously, with the current pandemic, but there's also been India, Pakistan squaring off against one another. There were the terrorist attacks, so there was
Yeah.
earthquakes. So throughout my career, that has served me well also. That'd be three or four additional mentors that it's like they all put a different patch on your leadership tapestry,
Yeah.
and I've been blessed with not having the same type of mentorship, um, or maybe there's something inside different types of leaders that understand somebody has something to give and are able to accept that gift.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing about some of those people specifically. I love hearing about the different people that have impacted leaders like yourself. So if we jump into talking about crisis management, say there's a leader listening who has never had to deal with a crisis. But I've just been working with someone recently who's been new in a CEO position, and they're in their first position. And I was saying to them, well, you're not inexperienced anymore. You now have, you've now got 1 year of experience, but for them, they're very much going, I know that I'm on a learning curve. And so there might be leaders out there who maybe no matter how long they've been in something, they've never been through a crisis like that. Although I guess with COVID, most leaders have been through an element of a crisis in the past 2 years, haven't they? What would be your sort of overview to a leader who hasn't had much experience with crisis management about that topic?
Hmm. Yeah, I've had a fair amount of it in my career, and I'd say what's different. I think first of all, what's different about most crises and this crisis is that this one is chronic and just does goes on a long period of time. Most of the crises either are acute and they're a matter of an event, um, and the impact of that event, both current and afterwards, or they go on for a couple months, but there's a clear ending. So I just say there's two types: chronic and acute. So, one
Mm,
important understanding is knowing your community. There's a great poem, and I wish I could recall the name of it, but the essence of it, Bob Hetzel sent to me. I was in the midst of the Mumbai terrorist attack,
yeah.
and he sent me this poem, and it was about a tree. He said, "Just remember, you're the right person at the right time for this crisis." Um, then he attached a poem that said, remember that once the leaves start shaking, the branches start shaking, the trunks start shaking, and before you know it, the whole tree is shaking, and the wind isn't blowing. And the point of the poem was that the crisis could be over, or you could be in the midst of it. But once everybody starts shaking, it's tough to get a hold of that shaking community. So a few
Mm,
things I learned is predictability of communication. So, even if you don't have anything to say, knowing that whatever your situation is, you will have an email, at 10 o'clock every morning as we go through this crisis.
yeah.
Whatever it is, it's really important to have that predictability of communication. It's also important because it is safe. People are paralyzed with fear to say, it's over or we are safe. We need to open the doors. We need to get back to it. We need to
Yes.
acknowledge our loss. We need to, for the kids' sake, we need to process the fear, but get back in the game. So, for example, with the terrorist attack, the one there, I
Mm,
called all the faculty and staff in on Sunday afternoon and said, we need to open tomorrow. We need to get
yeah.
school back open. We've got the safety of the Indian military and the other securities around us. Um, Kids are scared. Parents are scared. This is a safe haven. We need to open. And we opened with 97% of our kids coming back, which was
Wow.
remarkable.
Yeah.
Um, so I think those are a few things that how important communication is, acknowledging loss, processing it, but really being clear about when and how you're communicating.
I love that. I think that um, that's just such a. I think it's also there's probably a lesson in there that goes beyond um, even a crisis, but that is just brilliant advice around the predictability of communication. I think maybe it's because in the midst of so much uncertainty, in terms of that relationship with the organization, with the leader of the organization, that you're going to have certainty around um, knowing what's happening, and that's brilliant advice, Paul.
Yeah, and if I can say I don't think school leaders, maybe they do, recognize that very often, or at least in my experience, you become the center of the community. You're doing a better job than probably most companies are doing. Everything
Yeah.
is disparate, but you are the center of this whole community. So all of a sudden, we had a situation where some parents were tragically killed, and the community was calling me to come talk to the children at their building. And I came in with our school psychologist over to talk to. They had a student in kindergarten, fourth and seventh grade, and I walk into this room, and it was almost like I was a religious figure or a political figure or something. You had
Yeah.
this diverse international, but you walk into this building, it's like all of a sudden everybody is looking to you for communication, resolution, solutions, and you just have to be prepared that you are the center of a very diverse community, and people are going to look to you in different roles than they have before.
How honest did you? I guess in your experience going through a crisis like in Mumbai, which I can't even imagine leading through that. Um, how honest? What did you find helpful in terms of how honest to be with the stakeholders? With everyone involved about doubts and uncertainties that you were holding or the organization was holding, or did you work those out privately and then come out with an acknowledgement of some of that, but more strength? I'm interested to know what you found, how you managed that.
There's details you don't share. I think you need to exude the confidence, but not a reckless confidence. I think letting your guard down and being authentic with some of the challenges you face is good to do. But there are details that people don't need to know, if you will. But I think being
Sure.
authentic builds confidence with those around you, and those that authenticity and that confidence of the teacher and the teaching assistant in the classroom of a kindergarten class, for example, is going to impact these young kids. So if they have a level of confidence, the students are going to have a level of confidence. So it's really important. Like I go back to that high school principal, building that capacity in every member of your organization is so critically important. But I have to say, but there's a part that people would never, somebody asked, how did it feel to know, everything that you were dealing with? And probably to this day, it's like somebody gripped your heart and squeezed it and left a couple bruises.
Yeah.
And you can breathe, you can kind of breathe in and kind of feel that pain. Folks would never have seen that. But it was certainly there.
Yeah. That's a really good answer. What are the biggest mistakes you see leaders making in crisis, or when you've watched other leaders outside of education in crisis, and you've seen something maybe again and again, and you go, I think that's just unhelpful, and they're just shooting themselves in the foot. That's really not going to be a helpful way to navigate a crisis. What are some mistakes that you often see leaders make?
It's challenging because you don't know their context or their circumstances, so you're getting some partial information. But I think one mistake I would you clearly need a person in charge, if you will. But I found that the more a leader makes themselves the only how do I make this clear? I guess the mistake I see is when somebody makes the crisis about themselves more than the crisis. And I don't know if it's an ego or unintentional, but it's more about them than it is the crisis. And then it just deteriorates everything around it. So I find, having a team you're working with or a crisis team is a good approach, and I think exudes confidence. And it's fine for if it's the head of school or the head of the organization or an assistant, whoever is the head of that team. That's fine that you have that consistent communication or that person's leading that team. But I think that's probably the biggest thing when the crisis becomes more about an individual leader than it does about the crisis. Then it's kind of the cancer of the of finding resolution or getting through it.
Yeah, that reminds me of I can't remember where I read it or heard it, but about the really massive oil spill going back. Must be a decade. I can't remember what year it was in, or a bit longer. But there was something that the CEO of would have been BHP or BP, whoever.
Yeah.
And there was something that CEO said where right in the midst of it, which I can completely understand, but it was it just lost so much respect, because he said something along the lines of when the journalists were sort of trying to ask, do you realize how significant, like, this is the most catastrophic event in terms of an oil spill, and his response was along the lines of, oh, I know, it's been, it just never ends in terms of, like it just keeps following me. Or his response was about him, and it was about how it was affecting him, and it was a real foot in mouth moment. But I just remember hearing that and thinking, oh yeah, that was just a real turning point where I think up until that point people were still watching, and maybe there was hope that the response might be positive, but I really felt like the way I was reading this narrative about that story was a real point where people lost trust. And because
Yeah.
what he was saying was that this most significant environmental event, he went to the impact on him. And so I think
Yeah.
that's really profound with how you've explained that. Um, in terms of leadership, if we take more of a bird's eye view and take a step back, what do you see as even beyond education? For leaders, and particularly young leaders out there who might be listening, and they're in a role at the moment, and they look forward and think, oh, I'd love to be really doing something significant around the world somewhere as a leader of in a different culture or in the public sphere. Or what do you see as the biggest challenges facing all of us in the next 10, 20, 30 years for leaders, particularly younger leaders coming through?
Well, I think in the current, I think bringing people together, it was important 10, 15 years ago. It's going to become increasingly important going forward. So I think that is one through line, that the ability for young leaders to not just get consensus, but there just seems to be more polar opposites than I've seen in the past. There's always been disagreements and that sort of thing. So I think that ability to bring people together is important. Another one would be to the extent leaders are willing, if they want to get different experiences, being willing to make changes in location, industry, position, where you can get those experiences to move into different leadership positions. So, sometimes I face situations where you've got, I really try to develop leaders here at FIS in other ways, and I hate to lose them, but I also know that they need to move on and get different experiences at different locations if they're going to grow to be the next level of leaders. And I do see some folks that aren't have this aspiration to lead, but not the willingness to move to where the next experience is, so they can get stuck there, and then they're never going to have the scope of influence that they hope to, or the scope of impact that they hope to, because that level of leadership may not be in their current organization. So that would be a second piece of advice. And you may find it. I think it's just, you've got to know where you want to be, and be willing to take sometimes side steps or different steps to get to that position. Let's see. The other, I would say, our sense of belonging. How are we ensuring, cultivating organizational diversity within all of our whatever organization you're leading? That is, that's an opportunity for us here and now, but we're nowhere close to where we want to be in those areas. So I think that's going to be a important focus for internationalizing, diversifying our organization, so that all members of the community or members of a educational community feel they have the same access towards positions, resources, and such. So that will be something, I think, for the next generation of leaders to really gain some more momentum on, further than the start that's happened here today now.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to that first point you mentioned around bringing people together. I love technology, and I guess I really see the opportunities with technological advancements, with building teams and remote teams, and I think it's fascinating. So there's a couple of different aspects about this I'd love to ask you about. What have you learned through, particularly through COVID, with I guess, really bringing people together and building that sense of belonging, maybe for staff and for students and parents, when you haven't been able always to be together as much as normal, and that's had to be a bit different through COVID. What have you learned? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, to the one point previously, is if you will, the regular communication. I think from an accordion perspective, when you can get people together, you do so, and it might
Mm,
be in between waves or whatever. It can be small groups, different things. So we've really tried to, when things are good, we take advantage of them being good, and we come together. When we're virtual, and virtual has its benefits. Um, we I've used video more than I have in the past on a regular
yep.
basis, as I mentioned. So every week I've got a weekly message to the faculty and to what I would say our colleagues. That's all of our faculty, staff, all our contracted folks. So video
Yes.
has been effective, and then obviously you're using Zoom, but you use it in different ways. For example, we've been able to access like Dr. Amit Sood. He was at the Mayo Clinic on resilience. He did a session with our faculty and our community where he brought everybody, it brought everybody together around, an area that was permeating. It's not just a school thing; it's a parent thing, it's an educator thing. It permeated all of those areas. So those are a couple of examples. Consistency of communication. I think sometimes I'll have somebody come up to me and say, I saw the news last week, and you looked a little tired or something like that. Or somebody sends me a picture of having a glass of wine, and they're watching the news on a Friday night. But it builds that personal connection. Like, yeah, it was a hard week, and I'm
Yeah.
even as a head of school, it's been a hard week, and I know you've had a hard week in the classroom or as housemeister. So I think that visual connection every week, I think, has been helpful for our community um, going through this point. The other piece is I think there's a skill to facilitation. There's programs like facilitative leadership, and I would recommend that young leaders do get some training in how to facilitate groups. It sounds
Yes.
obvious, but sometimes I see folks that are wanting to facilitate groups, but they don't know if they're brainstorming, opening, closing, narrowing, making a decision. If they're in dialogue, they don't know where they are in the process, and what they want their group to do. And that sounds like leadership 101. But I would recommend, if young leaders or leaders of any age haven't had some training in facilitating groups, that they do that. So the people they're working with know where they're at, and know if we're making decisions or we're having conversation.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. Any resources that you've come across, or that are personal favorites of yours around, when it comes to facilitating and growing in that area of leadership?
Yes, I was just looking. Yeah. So facilitative leadership by Interaction Associates. I don't even know if they're still in business.
Mm,
Um, but there's others, obviously. There's a number of groups in every country, but that is one that Bob Hetzel in Delhi brought to us, and all of the leadership team went through this process, which was I found very effective. But there's a number of those types of things. So I think they're probably fairly easy to find. But that one worked. That one stuck with me. It's one of those binders that old school, I keep on my shelf, and I do find myself flipping
yes.
through it. Even it's been 18 years, but that binder's gone in every location I've gone to.
Yeah, that's gold. I love that, and I can see why that would be so helpful. When it comes to communication, one thing, so I'm thinking more of content for leaders who are trying to build a brand or involved in marketing, where the thing I often hear is, we really want to do this, and then this is an area sort of I'll work with leaders and with marketing teams on, and then you get 3 months down the track and you look at what they've done, and you say, well, we wanted to have you talking more to video, or we wanted to, but you've really, you haven't done that. And it's often a case of, well, I don't really know what to say, or they can be a bit perfectionistic about it. I'm just interested to know, like, for a leader who might not be a real media, like it's not necessarily their wheelhouse and their favorite thing to do. What sort of content? It might sound obvious, it might be natural to you, but what sort of content or what communication do you think leaders should be giving their communities regularly at all times, but particularly in crisis? What are the sort of things that a leader can speak to, or maybe use as prompts to, if they struggle to come up with content themselves?
Hmm. Well, they might be in a little trouble if they're leader and struggling to communicate, but
That's true.
I think you can go back to, I guess, you've got the facts. Okay, what is happening? Um, but I would go back to, okay, there's facts, there's information people need to know. There's that, but equally importantly is, what is the impact on the wellness, the mental health, the intangibles, but very tangible impact on students and adults in your community. So yes, the case rate per 100,000 might be this, fine, and the school is going to do this technically. But how is this impacting a fifth grade student? How are we as a school addressing, or as an organization, how are we addressing those critical aspects of people's wellness and mental health? Would be a second area I would, if somebody struggles, and that's probably where they're going to struggle, because
Mm.
the facts should come pretty clearly, and but it's that next level, that next circle around the facts is, what do these facts, how do they impact me as a student, as a employee, or as somebody, a parent in the community. So I think if they probably thought around those two things of what has happened, what do people need to know technically, and what is the impact? And I guess thirdly, how are you mitigating, or how are you as a school mitigating that impact? And is there some advice for parents or employees on how they can personally mitigate the impact of some of the negative aspects of the crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm putting you on the spot here, but can you think of any examples of what you just unpacked that come to mind that you felt were particularly useful for your community going through when you were going through one of the different crises you've had to lead through? Was there anything that comes to mind where you think, yeah, that's right, that particular message or that seemed to really stick with people, or that people said that was really helpful, or they found that really helpful? Does anything come to mind?
Oh boy, yeah. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, you've kind of got me with a flood. I'm trying to capture my thought here. It's I just think it's almost like flashes of things going through your things. In this most
Yeah.
recent one, um, geez. It's funny. I'm stumped uh, from the magnitude of communication, and just folks, like I said, coming up to talk to me about different things. And I think about seeing, working with our PT, our parent teacher group,
Mm.
them presenting, them sharing a challenge parents were having, us finding a resource, and then seeing parents, teachers, employees, myself, working with the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Sood, on an evening session, and then he and his daughter did a session for students in grades 1 and 2,
Oh wow.
called a Happy Genius program. But it had this cascading effect down to the students. I mean, there's so many. Yeah, there's just these ingredients throughout that we had. At the end of a professional development day, we coordinated a host of things that people could do. And for example, taking a walk in the woods, There was a frisbee. There was just things that were kind of an outlet. That was, another thing. There's like 40 or 50 just different things that create this tapestry of this crisis. That, any one of them, okay, that's, that that Zoom with an expert was, a 1% thing. That PD day activity was another percent, but they all add up to, a chronicness of success in this quilt of getting through it. So you kind of trip me up with, there's no, in the Mumbai or New Delhi, there was kind of some clear things because it was shorter lived, but this one is really
Yes.
a marathon of not getting worn down and continuing to bring things that are current and relevant, and not being too, you know, also recognizing is you can be too. There's that term toxic positivity. Try not to be toxically positive when things aren't going well, but
Yes.
we need to get through it. So let's make sure folks have the tools in every area that they can get through it, but also recognize it's a hard time.
I think there's something to that. I think that is an answer in itself. That you look at the current crisis and you go, well, even the Mayo Clinic, expert doing a Zoom session was probably a 1%, and I think that's so significant because it reminds me of I think John Maxwell, who talks about consistency and intentionality. If you can just be, as a leader, if you can be consistent and intentional,
Mm-hmm.
then that's so much of the battle. And I feel like that's sort of what you're touching on as well. Is through a crisis, if you can just, yeah, and there's some great engagement you just spoke to there around engaging with the parent teachers and that group and finding out what the challenges were. And I think if you can be consistent and intentional, and rather than trying to do, and I guess it's a little bit of what you've said about the communication as well, rather than trying to do one big amazing presentation speech to your community that moves mountains. What does it look like to have regular communication that is consistent, intentional, and really chips away at building that sense of belonging, that community, and building that bridge for people, but between you and the people you're leading, the people you're serving. I think, yeah. So I actually think that was a great answer.
Well, thank you. I felt I tripped up on that one, but
I think no one was prepared for this crisis. Not that people are necessarily prepared for any crisis, but I think you're right. The magnitude of how it's hung around, and the thing that came to mind as you were talking for me was, I think we need to learn from COVID about how to manage change better, because we've had this sort of ultimate case study of prolonged change and sort of change fatigue. And um, I think some of the things that we've learned through COVID that you've touched on there are actually really helpful things to consider, in particularly when people are leading transformational projects or transitional projects where there's a significant amount of change. And it won't be anything like what we've been through with COVID, but there will be some similarities, I think, where your community can get fatigued in the same way that our communities have been through this time. It's
you brought up
yeah.
you brought up an interesting point. I would argue that education has changed as a result of COVID in the last year and a half more than it's changed in the last 15 years. And
Mm,
I'm amazed at, part of it is it's not just technological. There is a technological side to it, but it's a willingness to adapt, risk take, try different things, from assessment to delivery to every aspect, has really been forced upon us as leaders, as educators. And I am just so impressed at the teachers here in Frankfurt and around the world who have had to move, change, and learn in such a exponentially different way. that will have profound effects going forward. So as much as I want COVID to be gone as fast as possible, we are profoundly changed as a profession for the better as a result.
Yeah, I agree. I've seen that, and I remember standing at a whiteboard with a team. It was probably last year when we were sort of 6 months in, really globally to COVID, and standing at the whiteboard with the team, and the words that we ended up putting up there for them, which I found really interesting because they were a school leadership team, and we put up the words revolution and revelation, and for them they were saying we need to. There was this sense of, okay, this has been a crazy, challenging 6 months, but they were saying there's been some things that this has like led to a bit of a revolution that would never have happened in some of the areas that we've just from reacting and needing to survive as educators and meet our mission and in this climate, and the other thing was the revelation. What are the things we've learned from this? We can't forget them. Like, we cannot get to the other side and forget them. And I was so impressed. I just was so taken aback that for a team that had been through so much, they had that perspective. And I've really been just blown away by the educators I work with and those that I know. It's been a really, really challenging season for educators. And I think you're right. I think it has. I think I think people and the profession is changed as a result of it, and it's significant. Well, that's probably a good place to land. But I said beforehand that I had a sense that we might only touch the surface. I want to ask you so many more questions, Paul, about um, so many different aspects of leadership. I really have appreciated your thoughts on what we've discussed, particularly around crisis management. I think probably the thing just right now that sticks out for me from our conversation today is the idea of how did you put it, the predictable communication. I think that's one of those things. I feel like so much of leadership is this. It's Patrick Lencioni talks about it with teams. In terms of building a healthy team, it's both remarkably simple and possible, yet painfully difficult. And I feel like predictable communication is one of those things. Gee, that's a simple idea, and that's so possible. Like, anyone can do that, and yet in the midst of a crisis, doing that is probably difficult to stick to that and do it. But that's just such a great piece of advice, and there's been so many. So I think it would be. I'd love to invite you back to do another a round two and to chat about more elements of leadership. We can touch on some different topics next time, perhaps, if you'd be keen.
Yeah, I've enjoyed talking with you, and I'd be happy to engage anytime.
And any final thoughts for you as we land today's conversation?
Yeah, just thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about leadership and people. It's a people business, and if we're, as Roland Barthes would say, you can tell the quality of a school by the nature of the adult relationships, and those adult relationships translate into the relationships with the students. So I think taking care of the people first will take care of all our students going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I love that. That's a great place to land. Well, thank you, Paul. I really appreciate you giving up the time. I really appreciate your thoughts today, and thank you to our listeners. I really appreciate you spending the time with us today, and we'll catch you next time.
All right. Thanks so much, Jano. Talk to you soon.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me, well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And you know, my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, John O. White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out John O. White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.